Hello and welcome back to Mondo Musings. I'm your presenter, Nicardo McLean. Now, this particular musing revolves around the question of whether Tina Clayton and Brianna Liston should forego competing at the Jamaican Junior Championships to challenge the seniors come June. Now, of course, this musing was inspired by the brilliant performance of both of these 17-year-olds in the 100-meter final for Class 1 girls at Boys and Girls Championships. Now, if we look back at those results, we see 11:23 into a 2.8 meter per second headwind for Tina Clayton to just get the better of Brianna Liston, who clocked a phenomenal 11:26 into that 2.8. And if we look at the conversions, of course, I'm big on conversions, using Jonas Marika's adjuster, we have 11:23 correcting to 11 seconds flat, 11 seconds in still wind, that is, for Tina Clayton, and Brianna Liston's 11:26 correcting to 11.03 seconds. So if they had zero wind, it suggests that both would have been right on the verge of breaking the magical 11-second barrier. And that's definitely then, of course, on par with pretty much everything that you would expect to be produced by the women in the second tier of Jamaican 100-meter sprinting, exempting, of course, the three superstars, Shericka Jackson, Shelly Ann Fraser-Price, and Elaine Thompson-Herah, the double Olympic champion. Now, in terms of our musing, I think it's instructive for us to look back before we look forward. And a perfect case to study, a case study, if you may, was provided by Brian Lavelle last year. Another Edwin Allen student, much like Tina Clayton, who bravely and unexpectedly, it must be said, stepped up to the plate to challenge the senior men in the 100 meters at Nationals last year. Now, obviously, big developmental differences between a 17-year-old boy and 20-odd, 30-odd-year-old men. And I think this played out over the course of his progression through the rounds. Did brilliantly to make the final, but if we look back, he entered the championship with a 10:21 on the clock personal best, with the support of a 1.7 meter per second headwind, which adjusts to about 10.30 seconds in still wind. Now, in the first round of those championships, we see where Brian Lavelle recorded a time of 10.25 seconds with the assistance of a 0.9 meter per second headwind, which converts, or adjusts rather, to about 10.30 seconds in that type of range. So basically, he needed to produce just about his personal best performance to make it through the prelims at the championship. In the subsequent round, the semifinals, he produced another time in that same range, 10:27, with the assistance of a 0.8 meter per second headwind to advance to the final. Sensational performance from him, obviously, but he was fourth in his heat and the slowest by a comfortable margin, expectedly, of the 8 finalists in the event. Now, in the subsequent final, having redlined it to this point, he obviously had very little left, backing up that semifinal with the final, which typically comes a couple hours after. Based on how the scheduling for Jamaican National Championships is, he wasn't able to even get back to that 10:30, 10:29 level, and he produced a 10:33 time, still very commendable performance with a 0.6 meter per second wind assisting him. So as we see, having used up pretty much all of his reserves and resources to get to that particular point, when the likes of Taekwondo Tracy stepped it up a level, Oblique Seville stepped it up a level, Julian Ford found something else, Javon Minzy did, he just did not have anything left in the tank to produce that dip in time and taper those times down to the type of range that would have seen him challenge for potentially a relay position or, who knows, maybe an individual spot on the team to Tokyo. Now, I think Brian Lavelle's performance provides some very insightful and instructive evidence and a basis for which to proceed with this reasoning regarding the prospects for Tina Clayton and Brianna Liston stepping up to the plate much like he did to challenge their seniors. Now, if we look at the prelims of the women's 100 meters at last year's national championships, we see where Shericka Jackson was the fastest of those, Elaine Thompson-Herah, Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce. Those, the big three, were the fastest of the qualifiers in the prelims, with Brianna Williams, the other member of that fabulous foursome that won gold in Tokyo in the 4x1 relay, being the fourth fastest of the qualifiers. Now, Shericka Jackson out of sight, Elaine Thompson-Herah out of sight, Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, who is not likely to contest the 100 meters at nationals, considering that the precedent established suggests that the defending champion will be given the privilege of the free ticket, essentially, the automatic, the bye to the World Championships. She's not likely to be in the field, but she will automatically be in Oregon, which leaves 3 spots up for grabs, as we're sending 4 as a result of that situation. Now, Brianna Williams, one would assume, would be the presumptive favorite, prevent favorite for that 4th berth, that 3rd spot at nationals. However, nothing is set in stone. Now, we see here that the slowest of the qualifiers, the 16 women who made it out of the prelims in 2021 last year, was Shelani Calvert-Powell at 11:53. Now, assuming that Tina Clayton and Brianna Liston are now bona fide 11:0 runners, 11:53 would not be very taxing for them to make it through, assuming that the level of performance is comparable with last year. 11:5 would not be a problem. They could comfortably do 11:5, do 11:4, do an 11:3, and make it through. So I think that's a fundamental difference between them and a Brian Lavelle, who had to be redlining it all the way through the rounds as he progressed. So let's assume they run 11:4 apiece, comfortably, and they make it through. In the semis, we saw where last year, the slowest of the semifinalists who made it to the final was Ashanti Moore, another very talented, promising sprinter, up-and-coming sprinter, and she ran 11:19 with the assistance of a 0.9 meter per second headwind. So we're looking at something adjusted in the 11:2 range. Again, not something that's overly taxing, one would imagine, for an 11:0 sprinter, a potential sub-11 sprinter, 10:9 sprinter, as we assume that potentially Tina Clayton and Brianna Liston could get down into that type of territory and may just be in that type of form. So we assume that they're asked to run an 11:15, say, or an 11:2. It's a straightaway race, so there's no inherent advantage or disadvantage afforded by your lane. You know, obviously there are some athletes who like to be in the thick of things, the middle lane, so they can feel the race better. But there are also athletes who have done exceptionally well because they like to be isolated in a lane 1, or they like the relative isolation of a lane 8 so that they can focus more on their own race without being distracted by what is going on, you know, in the middle of the track. So no inherent disadvantage in the lane. So whatever means by which they can advance, whether it is 8th overall or 3rd or 4th or 2nd overall or 1st overall, for argument's sake, it would not matter. They just need to punch their ticket and continue consistently to punch their tickets from round to round to round and give themselves the shot in the final. And as we saw at Boys and Girls Championships, the capacity is there for them to get down into the 11:0s and potentially sub-11 territory. Last year, as we saw, a brilliant race. Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, 10:71. Shericka Jackson, 10:82. Elaine Thompson-Herah, 10:84. 4th place was Brianna Williams, 11:01. Now, is that the type of time, assuming that Brianna Williams produces a similar time this year, which might be a misplaced assumption considering that she was so good indoors. 7:04 PB, I think it was, at the World Indoors. And you would expect a big time drop to come from her outdoors this year, maybe consistently running 10:9s, maybe dipping into the 10:8s. But that is not set in stone. That is not a given because we expected similar things, maybe a 10:9 from her last year, considering that she had PB'd leading up to the championship. And that big dip, that big tapering of time that we normally get from her was not produced. So 11:01, can Brianna Liston, can Tina Clayton get down into that type of territory? Sure. Can they run faster than the 11:15, which placed Ramona Burchell 5th last year? Ramona Burchell, brilliant rebound season for her after a succession of injuries, came back. Fantastic season last year. An Olympic gold medalist in the 4x1 because she did run on that relay in Tokyo. Brilliant season for her. But 11:15 is not a time, especially with a 1 meter per second tailwind, that you would expect that Tina Clayton and Brianna Liston would not be able to get to. Natasha Morrison 11:16 was 6th. Traditionally, the top 6 make up the relay pool. The top 6 in the 100 meters make up the relay pool for Jamaica at whatever global championship or regional championship or whatever championship happens to be taking place in that given year. You look at a Kemba Nelson, somebody who is a lot is expected from and who might be in line to make a big step up this year. But is Kemba Nelson somebody who you would dismiss out of hand the possibility of a Tina Clayton being able to beat or a Brianna Liston being able to beat? Ashanti Moore, another talented sprinter. You have Natalia White out there. You have Kiara Grant potentially coming back into the mix after suffering some injuries and having some challenges and transferring from Norfolk State to Clemson this year. And it will be very interesting to see how she progresses in her new environment with a new training group, with a new coach on her road to returning to prominence and a position of competitiveness on the Jamaican 100-meter women's landscape. But as I said, I think that is what gives me a certain level of confidence and potentially that unlike Brian Lavelle, these two young ladies would be able to make a more credible challenge for a position on a senior team because they would be able to hold a bit more in reserve than Brian Lavelle was able to do. Additionally, and this is one of the things that gives me an even greater level of encouragement as it relates specifically to Tina Clayton, is what was said by her in some of the interviews leading up to Champs and in the aftermath of Champs. I remember at Central Championships, after Brianna Liston stunned the world with that 11:14, where she indicated that they were running under instructions. In the prelims, they did much the same. In the final, I assume they did much the same. Just trying to progress from round to round. And we saw that at championships. In the semifinals, both were put into the same semifinal. Brianna Liston, as is her wont these days, got off to a blistering start. She was out the gate and gone. And if Tina Clayton was not so well coached, so emotionally and psycho-emotionally mature, she might have chased after Brianna Liston. She might have shot her load in that very semifinal and not had the capacity to produce the brilliant type of run that she did in the final, but she didn't. She kept in phase, she kept control, she ran her own race because she knew she was comfortably ahead of the other young women in the field, and she qualified comfortably in second, kept a lot in reserve, and ultimately we saw what she was able to produce in that final. Now, switching lanes to the 200 meters, where there are no buys for Jamaicans. If a Shelly-Ann Fraser-Price wants to contest the 200 meters in Oregon, she'll have to turn up and run the 200 meters. Elaine Thompson-Hero, much the same. Sharika Jackson, much the same, coming off the disappointments of the Olympics. She will be extra motivated, one assumes, to run the 200 meters. Now, Brianna Liston, on the evidence of that 22:53 brilliant run into a minus 2.2 headwind inside the National Stadium at the Boys and Girls Championships, is squarely in the mix, one would assume, for the position of 4th best 200-meter runner in the land. And I would think, on the evidence of that performance again, that she's likely the odds-on favorite. You're talking about a Natalia White again, who I think has more potential possibly over 200 meters. I think that's the event that she should focus on going forward. You're possibly talking about a Brianna Williams again, 22.5, just ahead of Brianna Liston in terms of the all-time Jamaican under 20 rankings in the 200 meters. You're talking about potentially somebody like a Sasha Lee Forbes, who I excluded earlier, but should also be in the mix for 100 meter spot, and Shakoria Wallace in the 100 meters as well. So a couple names that I missed there in contention for positions on the 100 meter team. But yes, back to the 200 meters and Brianna Liston. Now, obviously, if the big three women show up, that's all she wrote. You would expect those three to comfortably make the team in the top three positions. But is it a given that all three of those women will contest the 200 meters? You would think that Eileen Thompson-Herah has a lot of motivation considering the relative world championship disappointments that she's endured over the last couple of years. You would think that she has a bit of extra motivation then to show up and show out at the national championship. We've already spoken about Shericka Jackson and her motivations resulting or stemming from the disappointments at the Olympics last year. But does Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, who already has a world 200 meter gold medal under her belt, go through the rigors again at age 36? Does she put herself through those rigors once again to double at another major championship when the young guns are emerging and firing left, right, and center? You know, from all over the place. We saw earlier today, I saw a result from Favour Feely, another brilliant 200 meter talent. You know, somebody I think has world beating potential, going sub 22 for the first time in her career. So does she put herself through that gauntlet again? It's a critical question, and it's a pertinent question, I think. So if the big three don't show up for whatever reason for that 200 meters, does that then leave open the door for a Brianna Liston to slip into that threesome in the 200 meters for Oregon? Now, if we look at the progression through the rounds as we did with the 100 meters, for the 200 meters, the slowest of the qualifiers at the national championships last year in the prelims, and obviously what tends to happen at Jamaican national championships, if you have an ambition of making the team in either sprint, partial, whichever sprint you can make it in, you will take it, If you make it in the 100 meters, a lot of the times, or you feel like you have no hope in the 200 meters for whatever reason, you don't turn up for the 200 meters, which tends to follow the 100 meters in terms of the scheduling. And we saw that being the case last year, where ultimately it appears that only 15 women turned up for the 200 meters, and they had to cancel essentially the first round. So we see prelims here, but it was essentially the semifinals, the de facto semifinals of the national championship. And the slowest of the qualifiers in those de facto semifinals was Kevona Davis, another brilliant talent who could be in the mix in the 100 meters, though I think she should focus on the 200 meters given the inconsistencies with her start, because I think that is where she could potentially challenge. But she ran 23.2 to qualify in 8th, and she moved on to the final where she ultimately finished 7th. And of course, the big three women, 21.79 for Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, the national champion last year. Shericka Jackson, 21.82, pushing her all the way. Eileen Thompson-Herah, a little way back, 22.02. Obviously, we saw what she subsequently did at the Olympics. Natasha Morrison, another one in the 200 meters. Very impressive here, 22.74 by her standards. She finished 4th, 22.95 for Ashanti Moore. Big talent in both sprints. Natalia White, the young woman who I alluded to earlier, and I think she has incredible potential over the 200 meters, 23.08, and of course 23.19 for Kevona Davis in 7th in that final. But yes, as I alluded to, if either of the big three women, or if any of the big three women rather, don't show up, there definitely is an opportunity, because 22.74, assuming that the performance is at that level for the 4th spot, and you would imagine that there may be some improvement. But let's assume that 22.5, 22.4, 22.3 is required to make this team in the absence of one of the big three. Definitely, Brianna Liston is someone that you would expect to be in that type of mix. And even if the big three women show up and contest the event at nationals and consequently she's not able to crack that top 3, it would be excellent preparation, in my view, for the World Junior Championships, where obviously last year she contested the championship and was DQ'd in the final. The likelihood then was that she was not going to medal because you had Beatrice Masalingi, an Olympic finalist in the half lap. You had Christine Mboma, obviously, an Olympic silver medalist in the 200 meters, and Favour Feely, who I mentioned earlier, was also there and ran, I think, 22.3 to my recollection in that particular final. So if she doesn't make it back, Favour Feely has graduated from the junior ranks now, but Christine Mboma will be there, I assume. Beatrice Masalingi will be back there, I assume. High-level competitors, in Mboma's case, a 21.7 runner. In Masalingi's case, you're talking about 22 lows, So that high-level preparation, competing against Olympic final grade runners to prepare yourself to compete against Olympic final grade runners would be very, very good for Brianna Liston, even if she's not able to crack the top 3 and earn an individual spot to the World Championships in Oregon. Now, another interesting indicator, I think, of the stars potentially aligning for these young ladies and their potential quest to make the senior team to the World Championships is the fact that the World Championships is set to start, I think, scarcely 3 weeks after the Jamaican National Championships, which means that any potential peak, because this obviously is a concern when it comes to young athletes, specifically those who compete at champs, who have to hit an earlier peak, a March, April peak, and then taper and pick up again to hit a peak in June, July, and maybe sustain that peak through August. The World Championships follows closely on the heels, probably the closest it has ever followed in the history of track and field to the Jamaican National Championships. So sustaining that peak should not theoretically be as big a challenge for the coaches and conditioners of these athletes as it would in a quote-unquote traditional year. So that, I think, is another thing that could potentially play in the favor of these young ladies who by that time would have had a very long season. And if they shoot for the moon and don't ultimately hit the moon, they can always fall back on the cloud that is the World Under 20 Championships. So those are just a few of my thoughts about Brianna Liston and Tina Clayton potentially. And this would be extremely exciting for all concerned to see these fine blossoming talents step up to the plate and challenge the seniors without having to redline it all the way and risking potential injury. And I think there's a distinct possibility that they would not have to do that to make it through the rounds and save that one big run as they did at championship for the finals and let the chips fall where they may. So those are my thoughts. What say you? So drop your comments in the comment section down below and let me know what you think. Do you think it's a good idea for them to embark on such a quest? Do you think it's foolish, foolhardy? Well, whatever your thoughts, I'd love to hear them, and let's have a conversation surrounding this potentially very exciting development. I'm Ricardo McLean. Thank you as always for tuning in to Mondo Musings. Until next time, Godspeed.